Welcome back, everyone. As I explore this peaceful Minecraft landscape, building my little base, I've got some absolutely wild stories for you today. Imagine someone tries to use your own IT infrastructure against you while sleeping with your spouse. It's the ultimate double betrayal that makes you question every relationship in your life. There's something almost poetic about the way these situations unfold, where the very people you trusted with your most valuable assets are the ones orchestrating your downfall. Whether it's your company's data or your marriage, the violation cuts twice as deep when it's a two-pronged attack. But that's just the beginning of today's journey through some of Reddit's most jaw-dropping relationship and workplace nightmares. We've got exchange students with secret agendas, calculated revenge plots years in the making, and betrayals that will make your own problems seem refreshingly manageable. So settle in and let's dive into our first unbelievable tale. I never suspected anything was off when we hired Marcus to upgrade our small business network. My wife Jessica and I had built our marketing agency from scratch over 8 years, growing from just the two of us to 15 employees. We were finally successful enough to need serious IT infrastructure beyond what I could cobble together myself. Marcus came highly recommended through a colleague. He was brilliant but socially awkward, exactly what you'd expect from a tech genius. Thick glasses, rarely made eye contact, always wore the same three rotating black t-shirts with obscure programming jokes. But what he lacked in social graces, he made up for in efficiency. Within weeks, our systems were running smoother than ever. Jessica, who handled all our HR, seemed particularly impressed with him. "He's transforming our entire digital infrastructure," she'd tell me over dinner. "We're lucky to have found someone so talented willing to work for a company our size." I noticed she was staying late more often for what she called system training sessions. I never questioned it. We were both workaholics, and I was grateful she was taking an interest in the technical side of our business. 3 months into Marcus's employment, I noticed something strange while reviewing our network logs. Large data transfers were happening regularly at odd hours, 2 a.m., 3 a.m. When I mentioned it casually to Marcus, he explained it away as automated backups and system optimization routines. It sounded reasonable enough, but something felt off about his explanation. I decided to dig deeper without alerting anyone. What I found made my blood run cold. Our entire client database, including proprietary campaign strategies, financial information, everything, was being systematically copied to an external server. The transfers were disguised as routine maintenance, but they were anything but routine. Someone was stealing everything we'd built. I confronted Marcus in private, expecting denial or panic. Instead, he leaned back in his chair with this smug smile I'll never forget. "Took you long enough to notice," he said, spinning his monitor around to show me a complex dashboard I'd never seen before. "I've integrated myself so deeply into your systems that you couldn't remove me if you tried. Everything is encrypted with keys only I possess." The casual way he admitted it shocked me more than the theft itself. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "A partnership stake, 25% of the business," he said, adjusting his glasses, "and complete immunity from any consequences. In exchange, your data stays where it belongs, and your clients never learn how vulnerable their information was under your care." I told him I needed to discuss it with Jessica, and left the office, my mind racing. This wasn't just blackmail, it was the potential destruction of everything we'd built. Our reputation in the industry would be ruined if clients found out their data had been compromised. That evening, Jessica didn't come home. Around 8 p.m., I got a text. "We need to talk. Not tonight. I need space." It wasn't like her at all. We'd always faced business problems together. My instinct told me something was very wrong. I tracked her phone location, something we'd set up years ago for safety when working late. The map led me across town to an apartment complex I didn't recognize. I found her car in the visitor parking. Apartment 3B had a nameplate reading M. Wilson, Marcus Wilson. And here's where it gets absurd. Instead of confronting them immediately, I stood outside his ground floor apartment like some pathetic stalker, looking through a gap in the blinds. There they were, sitting at his dining table, champagne glasses in hand, laughing while scrolling through what looked suspiciously like our company files on his laptop. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Not only was he stealing our business data, but he was sleeping with my wife, our company's HR manager who had championed hiring him from the start. Everything clicked into place with sickening clarity. Her late nights, her constant praise of his work, the way she convinced me to give him full network access despite my initial hesitation. This wasn't recent. This had been their plan all along. I'm not proud of what I did next. I sat in my car for hours, alternating between rage and despair. But eventually logic took over. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. 15 people depended on our company for their livelihoods. I had to think strategically. Instead of confronting them, I contacted a cybersecurity specialist I'd met at a conference last year. I explained the situation, leaving out the personal betrayal, and offered an emergency contract at triple his normal rate. By some miracle, he was available and agreed to come first thing in the morning. The specialist, Dave, arrived at 6 a.m. long before anyone else would be in the office. For 3 hours, he worked silently, occasionally muttering technical jargon I couldn't follow. Finally, he leaned back with a satisfied sigh. "Your guy's good, but not as good as he thinks. He left a back door for himself, and now I've left one for you." Dave showed me how Marcus had built his encryption system, and more importantly, how to bypass it. You can recover everything. I've also documented all the unauthorized data transfers for legal purposes. We implemented the recovery protocols while Marcus was distracted. Based on Jessica's car still being at his apartment, I assumed they'd spent the night celebrating what they thought was their perfect leverage. I also contacted our lawyer and the police, presenting the evidence of corporate espionage. The look on their faces the next morning when they walked into the office together, not even bothering to arrive separately, to find 2 police officers waiting. I almost wish I'd recorded it. Jessica went pale, while Marcus's smugness evaporated as the officers explained the charges. Corporate espionage, blackmail, computer fraud. "You can't prove anything," Marcus sputtered. "The system is locked down. You need me." That's when I nodded to Dave, who pressed a key on his laptop, displaying all our recovered data on the conference room screen. "Actually, we don't." Jessica tried to claim she knew nothing about the data theft, that their relationship was personal and separate. But her company email told a different story. Messages coordinating which client's information would be most valuable, which systems needed special attention. The digital trail they'd left was comprehensive. The aftermath was messy. Criminal charges for Marcus, divorce proceedings for Jessica, and the difficult task of explaining to our staff what had happened without destroying morale. We lost 2 clients when they learned about the breach, despite our successful recovery. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself, but realizing how blind I'd been. All the signs were there. I just hadn't wanted to see them. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones with the perfect angle to slip the knife in. I might have lost my marriage, but I saved the company. We've implemented security protocols that would make the Pentagon envious, and I've learned a valuable lesson about trusting experts without verification. Every new hire now goes through extensive background checks, regardless of who recommends them. Her face when she realized I knew everything, about the data theft, about their relationship, about their entire plan, was almost worth the betrayal. Almost. You know what? I genuinely thought this couldn't get worse than finding your IT guy stealing your data. But throw in a cheating spouse who was in on it from the beginning, and you've got a special kind of nightmare. The level of calculated betrayal here is just chef's kiss of awful, but wait until you hear what happened next. Because the exchange student living with my neighbor had an even more devious plan brewing. I was so excited when the opportunity came up to host an exchange student. After 15 years of marriage with no children, not by choice but due to my fertility issues, I thought it would be nice to have a young person around the house. The local university had a program for international students who needed host families, and I immediately signed us up. When I told my husband Richard about it, he was surprisingly resistant. "We value our privacy," he argued. "Do we really want some stranger living with us for months?" I reminded him how empty the house had felt since we'd given up on having children, and how we had plenty of room in our 4-bedroom home. Still, he seemed unconvinced. Then we received the profile of Sophia, a 22-year-old art history student from Florence. There was a photo of her, olive-skinned, dark-haired, with these incredible amber eyes. Something shifted in Richard when he saw her picture. "You know what?" he said, looking at her photo a bit too long. "Maybe this isn't such a bad idea after all." I was thrilled by his change of heart. Richard even insisted on picking Sophia up from the airport himself, since I had a work meeting I couldn't reschedule. When I got home that evening, they were chatting in the kitchen like old friends. There was a familiarity between them that I attributed to Richard's natural charm. He'd always been good with people. The first few weeks were wonderful. Sophia was polite, helpful around the house, and seemed genuinely interested in American culture. Richard, who normally worked long hours at his law firm, suddenly started working from home several days a week to make Sophia feel welcome. I thought it was sweet how he'd taken on a sort of protective role, but then I started noticing things. Small things at first, whispered conversations that stopped when I entered a room. Sophia taking phone calls in rapid Italian late at night, her voice hushed but intense. The way Richard would touch her shoulder, or the small of her back when he thought I wasn't looking. I told myself I was being paranoid. Of course they'd become friends, they were living under the same roof. And the touches? Richard had always been physically affectionate with everyone. Then came the shopping trips. Richard started accompanying Sophia to the grocery store, returning with bags of specialty foods I'd never seen before. When I asked about it, they both quickly explained it was for Sophia's special dietary needs. I didn't remember any dietary restrictions being mentioned in her application, but I brushed it off. Cultural differences, I told myself. What I couldn't brush off was finding prenatal vitamins in Sophia's bathroom while tidying up one day. At first, I thought I'd misread the label, but no, they were definitely pregnancy vitamins. My mind raced. Was she already pregnant when she arrived? Was that why she needed a host family? But why hide it? That's when everything unraveled. I confronted Sophia that evening while Richard was at a late meeting. I simply held up the vitamins and asked for an explanation. She broke down immediately, tears streaming down her face as she admitted everything. She and Richard hadn't met for the first time at the airport. They'd been talking online for nearly a year after connecting on a language exchange app. What had started as innocent language practice had evolved into an affair. And yes, she was pregnant, about 4 months along, with my husband's child. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach, but that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was learning that Richard had orchestrated the entire exchange student placement. He had contacts at the university who helped arrange it. He had created fake credentials for Sophia, who wasn't even a student. The entire thing, from the application to her backstory, had been fabricated. Their plan, which Sophia revealed through sobs, was for her to live with us for 6 months, then return to Italy. A few months later, she would reappear with their newborn child. Richard would file for divorce, claiming he'd met Sophia during a business trip to Italy after she'd left our home. They would get married, and no one would question the timeline of their relationship or the child's birth. I sat there listening to this young woman detail how my husband had methodically planned to replace me with her and their baby. The level of calculation was breathtaking. For years, I'd supported Richard through law school, moved 3 times for his career, and endured countless fertility treatments trying to give him the family he wanted. And all along, he'd been planning my replacement. When Richard came home that night, he found Sophia's suitcases by the door and me waiting in the living room. The look of confusion on his face quickly turned to panic when he realized what had happened. "I can explain," he started, but I cut him off. "Sophia already did," I said, surprised by the calmness in my voice. "All of it. The online affair, the fake exchange program, the pregnancy, your little plan to replace me." He switched tactics immediately from denial to justification. "You couldn't give me children," he said as if that explained everything. "Sophia can. We didn't plan for the pregnancy, but once it happened, it felt like fate." "Fate," I repeated. "Was it also fate that made you bring your pregnant mistress into our home instead of just divorcing me like a normal person?" "I was trying to protect you," he insisted. "This way, we could separate gradually. You wouldn't be blindsided." The audacity of it all, claiming that elaborate deception was somehow kinder than honesty, was what finally broke me. I started laughing, which clearly wasn't the reaction he expected. "Get out," I said when I could speak again. "Both of you, now." Richard tried to argue about where they would go, about needing time to pack properly, about it being late. I reminded him that as a successful lawyer, he could afford a hotel. Then I informed him that I'd already called a locksmith who would be arriving in the morning to change the locks, and that anything left behind would be donated to charity. They left, but I wasn't finished. The next day, I sent a detailed email to the ethics board at Richard's law firm, outlining how he had used firm connections to fraudulently place his mistress in an exchange program. I also contacted immigration authorities about Sophia's falsified visa application. The fallout was swift and severe. Richard's firm placed him on unpaid leave pending an investigation. Immigration authorities opened a case against both of them. Last I heard, Sophia was deported back to Italy, and Richard is facing potential disbarment and fraud charges. He's also unemployed as the firm eventually fired him once they verified my claims. As for me, I kept the house in the divorce settlement, along with a substantial portion of our assets, due to Richard's marital misconduct. I've started volunteering with legitimate exchange student programs, helping genuine international students adjust to life in America. There's something healing about redirecting the pain of betrayal into something positive, and I've learned that sometimes, when life denies you the family you thought you wanted, it's making room for the family you actually need, one built on honesty and genuine connection, not deception and betrayal. The mental gymnastics required to convince yourself that moving your pregnant mistress into your marital home is somehow the considerate option. You've got to wonder what color the sky is in that alternate reality. It's almost impressive how some people can reframe their worst behavior as an act of kindness. If you're thinking that's bad, just wait until I tell you about the homeless man who wasn't actually homeless at all. I always made it a point to help the homeless in my area. Growing up in a household where my parents emphasized giving back, I tried to keep their values alive, especially after moving to the city on my own. There was this one particular man who started appearing outside my apartment building about 6 months ago. Disheveled, with a matted beard and layers of tattered clothes regardless of the weather, he'd sit on the same corner with a cardboard sign asking for help. At first, I just dropped some change in his cup, like I would for anyone else. But over time, I started bringing him coffee in the mornings, or sandwiches on my way home. There was something about him that tugged at my heartstrings, something vaguely familiar that I couldn't quite place. I figured maybe he reminded me of someone, or perhaps I'd seen him around the neighborhood before he fell on hard times. "Thank you, Ellie," he said one morning after I handed him a coffee. "2 sugars and almond milk, just how you like it too." I froze for a moment. I hadn't told him my name, let alone how I took my coffee. When I questioned him, he quickly backpedaled. "The barista called you that when you picked up your order," he explained, gesturing to the coffee shop down the street. It seemed plausible enough, so I brushed it off. But then came more moments like that. He'd thank me for the chicken sandwich with no tomatoes, even when the bag was closed and I hadn't mentioned what was inside. Or he'd ask about my promotion at work, something I'd only told my closest friends about. Each time he had a reasonable explanation. He overheard me on the phone, or someone in the building mentioned it. Still, an uneasy feeling began to grow. Around that same time, small, strange things started happening in my life. My mail would arrive opened, with the envelopes carefully resealed. Appointments I was certain I'd scheduled would be cancelled when I showed up. Friends would ask why I'd sent them such hostile text messages, messages I had no memory of writing. At first, I chalked it up to stress. I'd been working long hours at my marketing job, and maybe I was becoming forgetful. I started keeping more detailed notes in my phone, double-checking everything, setting multiple alarms, but the incidents only increased. Then came the breaking point. My best friend Zoe stopped speaking to me after receiving horrific messages from my email account, detailing all the ways I apparently secretly hated her. When I went to her apartment to sort things out, showing her my phone to prove I hadn't sent anything, she pulled up emails that were definitely from my account, but that I had no recollection of writing. They contained personal details only I would know, things I'd never say to anyone, let alone my closest friend. I started to genuinely question my own sanity. Was I having some kind of episode where I was doing these things and forgetting them? I began seeing a therapist who suggested keeping a journal to track my movements and thoughts. I changed all my passwords, installed security cameras in my apartment, and even considered moving. The homeless man, who'd said his name was Duke, started to seem like the only constant in my increasingly chaotic life. He was always there with a kind word, increasingly offering advice. "You know, Ellie, you seem stressed lately. Maybe you should take some time off work," he'd suggest. Or, "Have you considered that some of your friends might not have your best interest at heart?" Somehow, he was always outside my building exactly when I was coming or going, as if he knew my schedule perfectly. And here's where it gets absurd. One night, coming home late after a therapy session where I'd broken down completely, I saw him across the street. It was nearly 11 p.m., and he was standing in the shadows watching my building. As I pretended to walk past without noticing him, he crossed the street and approached the entrance. To my shock, he pulled out a key and let himself in. My heart pounding, I waited a few moments before following. I crept up the stairs instead of taking the elevator, not wanting the sound to alert him. When I reached my floor, I peeked around the corner to see Duke, minus the layers of grime and looking much more put together than usual, using a key to enter my apartment. I should have called the police immediately, but something in me needed to know what was happening. I waited 5 minutes, then used my own key to enter as quietly as possible. The shower was running, giving me cover to look around. What I found made my blood run cold. On my kitchen table were journals, not mine, meticulously documenting my daily routine, conversations I'd had with friends, even what I'd eaten for lunch each day. My laptop was open, showing my email account and a draft of another nasty message to a different friend. In my bathroom cabinet were prescription bottles with my name on them, medications I'd never been prescribed. But the most chilling discovery was in a backpack on my couch. Inside were dozens of photos of me and my ex-boyfriend, Daniel, from 3 years ago. In every single one, my face had been scratched out with something sharp. There were also printouts of my therapy notes. Somehow he'd hacked my therapist's files, with sections highlighted and annotated. The water shut off. I grabbed my phone and the backpack as evidence and slipped out, running straight to the police station 6 blocks away. The investigation revealed the horrifying truth. Duke was actually Daniel, my ex-boyfriend whom I'd broken up with 3 years earlier after discovering his increasingly controlling behavior. He'd apparently never gotten over our breakup. The police found he'd been planning this for over a year, creating the homeless disguise, studying my habits, even renting an apartment in my building under a fake name to have easy access. The extent of his deception was breathtaking. He'd cloned my phone, installed keyloggers on my devices, and even placed cameras in my apartment during the times he'd let himself in. The medications found in my bathroom? Low doses of psychiatric drugs he'd been systematically adding to food he knew I'd ordered for delivery, slowly increasing the dosage to make me feel disoriented and paranoid. His plan, as detailed in his own journals, was to completely isolate me from friends and support systems, make me doubt my own sanity, and then swoop in as the only person I could rely on, eventually convincing me to let him move in to help me through my mental health crisis. From there, he'd planned to cut me off from my therapist and take complete control of my life again. Daniel is now serving an 8-year sentence for stalking, breaking and entering, identity theft, attempted poisoning, and a host of other charges. I've moved to a new city, changed my name, and am slowly rebuilding my sense of security with the help of a trauma specialist. The most disturbing part isn't even the elaborate disguise or the meticulous planning. It's how patient he was, willing to sit outside in all weather, day after day, playing a role just to systematically destroy my life from the inside out, all because I had the audacity to leave him. Mid-roll CTA. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you are watching from in the comments. Now, back to how this homeless man systematically destroyed this woman's life. I've read some messed up revenge plots before, but the dedication to creating an entire alternate identity for months just to gaslight someone, that's next level psychological warfare. There's crossing the line, and then there's whatever this is, building a house on the other side of the line and settling in for the long haul. Think that's twisted? Wait until you hear how a yoga instructor turned children against their own mother. I never thought I'd be one of those guys telling a story about how my marriage fell apart, but here we are. My wife Sarah and I had been together for 15 years, with twin 12-year-old boys and a 10-year-old daughter. We weren't perfect, but we were solid. Or so I thought. I worked hard as an investment advisor, providing a comfortable life in our suburban home with the white picket fence and all that. Sarah had put her career on hold to raise the kids, but had recently started talking about finding herself again, now that our youngest was in school full-time. When Sarah mentioned she wanted to try yoga to help with stress and rediscover her sense of self, I was completely supportive. She'd given up so much for our family. She deserved something just for her. She found this private instructor named Kai, who specialized in holistic wellness journeys or something like that. He had apparently studied in India and Thailand and offered personalized sessions that combined yoga, meditation, and what he called spiritual alignment. The change in Sarah was remarkable at first. She seemed more energetic, more present, less anxious. She talked about centering herself and finding balance. And while I didn't really get all the spiritual jargon, I was happy to see her happy. So when she suggested the kids might benefit from Kai's teaching too, I didn't object. They were at ages where they were trying to figure themselves out. And if it helped them manage stress from school and sports, why not? Within a couple of months, our entire household rhythm had shifted. Sarah and the kids had these special meditation sessions together. They adopted new eating habits. Suddenly, we were a strictly organic, plant-based household. They had inside jokes and terminology I didn't understand. When I'd try to join conversations, they'd exchange glances, as if I was interrupting something important. "Dad just doesn't get it," I overheard my daughter telling Sarah one night. "Kai says some people are just stuck in material thinking." "Your father has a lot of negative energy to work through," Sarah replied. "We need to be patient with him." That was the first moment I felt a genuine chill. They were talking about me like I was some kind of problem to be solved or tolerated. When I tried to discuss it with Sarah, she smiled in this new, serene way that somehow felt condescending. "You wouldn't understand without experiencing Kai's guidance," she said. "Maybe you should try a session." I actually considered it, thinking it might help me reconnect with my family. But every time I suggested joining them, there was always some reason why it wasn't the right time. Kai needed to prepare the space energetically for a newcomer, or they were working on a special familial vibration that couldn't be disrupted. Then came the breaking point. My son Jake asked me to drive him to a friend's house, but accidentally left his phone in my car. When it kept buzzing with notifications, I glanced at it, thinking it might be important. There was a group chat with Sarah, his siblings, and a number saved as Kai Guide where they were actively discussing me. "Remember what Kai says, Dad's energy is toxic because he's so materialistic," my wife had written. "We need to protect our spiritual growth." Today's visualization really helped me see how Dad's been manipulating us all with guilt and financial control, my daughter had replied. She was 10 years old. 10. Using words and concepts no child that age would naturally express. I was stunned. I'd never been perfect, but I'd spent 15 years trying to be a good father, coaching soccer teams, helping with homework, working long hours to make sure they had everything they needed. Now I was being cast as some kind of spiritual villain. When I confronted Sarah that night, her entire demeanor changed. Gone was the serene smile, replaced with cold determination. "Kai has helped us see the truth about you," she said calmly. "The kids and I have decided we need space to continue our spiritual journey without your negative influence." Within a week, she had filed for divorce, emptied our joint accounts of nearly $80,000, and taken the kids to what she called a healing retreat, but was actually an Airbnb across town. When they returned, the kids wouldn't even make eye contact with me. They used identical language about how I had emotionally manipulated them and created a materialistic prison for the family. During our first custody hearing, all three kids testified with eerily similar stories about how I had supposedly belittled their interests, controlled their mother through financial abuse, and created an emotionally unsafe environment. They described specific incidents that simply never happened, like me throwing away my daughter's art because it wasn't practical, or forbidding my sons from having friends who weren't from wealthy families. The judge, hearing three children tell consistent stories of emotional abuse, granted Sarah temporary full custody. I was limited to supervised visitation once a week, which the kids attended reluctantly, sitting stiffly and answering my questions with rehearsed-sounding one-word responses. I was completely devastated. In the space of 3 months, I'd lost my entire family to whatever influence this yoga instructor had over them. My lawyer advised me to look deeper into this Kai person, suggesting this level of family alienation seemed suspiciously systematic. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. The breakthrough came from the most unexpected source, Jake, my oldest son by 7 minutes. During one of our supervised visits, while his siblings were in the bathroom, he quickly slid a folded piece of paper across the table. "I found this in Kai's bag when he left it open," he whispered. "I made a copy. I don't know what's happening anymore, Dad." The paper contained photographed pages from what appeared to be Kai's personal journal. As I read through them that night, my blood ran cold. It detailed, in Kai's flowing handwriting, his systematic approach to client acquisition and separation, specifically targeting affluent families with a stay-at-home spouse looking for purpose. He outlined his methodology for creating division, alienating the working spouse, building dependency in the rest of the family, and ultimately positioning himself to receive substantial spiritual guidance fees during divorce proceedings. Most disturbing were his notes about my specific family. S responding well to validation techniques, children ideal age for conceptual reprogramming. J, father, typical provider type, easy to reframe as emotional abuser. Estimate 18-20% of liquid assets achievable as emergency spiritual guidance retainer during separation. There were other family names in there too, with similar notes and success metrics measured in dollars. This wasn't Kai's first time running this scheme, it was his business model. I immediately took the journal pages to my lawyer, who brought in a private investigator. Within 2 weeks, they had compiled evidence that Kai had done this to at least 4 other families in different suburbs. He had no legitimate yoga certification or counseling credentials. What he did have was a history of fraud charges in 2 other states and a well-practiced system for inserting himself into families and extracting money. When presented with the evidence, the judge reversed the custody order and granted me temporary full custody while Sarah underwent psychological evaluation. The kids, removed from Kai's influence and shown evidence of his manipulation, began to question the things they'd been told. It was a slow, painful process of family therapy, real therapy, with licensed professionals. But gradually they started to remember who I actually was versus the villain Kai had painted me to be. Sarah, unfortunately, maintained that Kai was her spiritual guide even after his arrest for fraud and practicing therapy without a license. She refused psychological help and currently has only supervised visitation with the kids. As for Kai, he's facing multiple charges of fraud across 3 states. During the investigation, they found over $300,000 in a hidden bank account, all from spiritual guidance fees paid by families he'd torn apart. The hardest part of all this wasn't the legal battle or even the temporary loss of custody. It was sitting across from my children in therapy as they realized they'd been manipulated into betraying their dad and watching them grapple with that guilt. I keep telling them it wasn't their fault, that adults who exploit children's trust are the only ones to blame. Some days they believe me. We're getting there, slowly. The ability to weaponize children against a parent is truly next-level manipulation. Imagine having the moral compass of a broken slot machine and deciding spiritual guide is a great cover for professional family destroyer. The fact that multiple families fell for this before someone caught on just shows how vulnerable people are when seeking meaning and connection. Speaking of deception, wait until you hear about the intern whose mistake was actually part of a much bigger scheme. Taking over my father's company was never going to be easy. Martin Reynolds had built Reynolds Technologies from his garage into a 500-employee tech firm specializing in industrial automation software. His name was on the building, his signature on the letterhead, his face in the company history video we showed to new hires. When he finally stepped down as CEO at 70, handing me the reins while remaining chairman of the board, I felt the weight of his legacy crushing down on me. Dad had always been a tough mentor. Growing up, nothing I did was ever quite good enough. My A-minuses should have been A's. My winning baseball games should have been shutouts. When I joined the company after business school, I started at the bottom despite being the founder's son. I worked my way up through sales, project management, and operations over 15 years. When I finally became CEO at 38, I thought I'd finally earned his approval. "Don't screw it up," was all he said on my first day. For the first year, I maintained Dad's conservative approach while learning the ropes. But the industry was changing rapidly, with cloud-based solutions threatening our traditional software model. I developed a 5-year plan to transition our products and protect our market share. The board, except for my father, cautiously approved my strategy. That's when I hired Allison as my executive intern. She was brilliant, Stanford MBA, previous experience at a major tech company, insightful questions about our business. Her resume was impeccable, Her interviews impressive. She quickly became indispensable, handling everything from market research to preparing my board presentations. If she occasionally mixed up meeting times or sent emails to the wrong person, it seemed a small price to pay for her otherwise stellar performance. Your father had reservations about hiring her, my VP of HR mentioned casually one day. Said something about her seeming too polished. I dismissed his concerns as the typical grumbling of a semi-retired founder who couldn't fully let go. Dad had opposed several of my decisions lately. From our new product direction to the office renovation, I was determined to prove I could lead this company my way. 3 months into Allison's internship, we were finalizing our new product roadmap, the detailed 5-year strategy that would transform Reynolds Technologies from a legacy software provider into a cloud-first solutions company. The document included proprietary algorithms, pricing strategies, target clients, and R&D investments. Only the executive team and board had seen the complete version. I had a crucial meeting with our biggest potential new client, so I asked Allison to make final edits to the presentation and distribute it to the board. When I returned, successful pitch in hand, she was waiting in my office, looking distressed. "I made a terrible mistake," she said, eyes welling with tears. When sending the roadmap to the board, I accidentally included someone from Axiom Systems. My blood ran cold. Axiom was our biggest competitor, run by my father's former business partner. They'd been trying to poach our clients for years. "How could this happen?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. "Their email was in my contacts from when I researched them for your competitive analysis," she explained. "It auto-completed when I typed A for Anderson, your board member." I immediately called our legal team, but the damage was done. The email had been opened, the attachments downloaded. We sent cease and desist letters, but within weeks, Axiom announced a new strategic direction that mirrored our confidential plans. Major clients, hearing of both initiatives and seeing Axiom moving faster, began jumping ship. Our stock dropped 30% in a month. That's when everything unraveled. At the emergency board meeting, my father led the charge. "This catastrophic breach shows a fundamental lack of oversight," he announced to the room. "While Alex has some good qualities, this incident proves he lacks the judgment to lead Reynolds Technologies." The vote was 8-3 to remove me as CEO. Only my 3 appointees stood by me. My father announced he would return as interim CEO, while the board searched for a permanent replacement. I was offered a non-executive position to save face, but I declined. I couldn't bear to stay and watch everything I'd worked for dismantled. The professional humiliation was complete. Industry publications ran articles about how the founder's son had lasted barely 2 years before a massive security breach forced the board to remove him. Former colleagues stopped returning my calls. Executive recruiters politely informed me that my profile didn't match current opportunities. I sank into depression, barely leaving my apartment for months. I kept replaying every interaction with Allison, trying to understand how someone so competent could make such an elementary mistake. It didn't add up, but I had no evidence of anything beyond terrible carelessness. 6 months after my ousting, my mother insisted I attend their anniversary dinner. "Your father misses you," she claimed, though he hadn't reached out once. I went only to please her. The dinner was awkward, with Mom trying desperately to maintain conversation, while Dad and I exchanged minimal pleasantries. After several glasses of wine, however, my father's guard began to drop. He started talking about the company's recovery under his returned leadership. "The Axiom partnership has been surprisingly beneficial," he mentioned casually. "James and I should never have parted ways all those years ago. Bringing the companies closer together makes sense." I nearly choked on my drink. "Partnership? With Axiom? Nothing formal yet," he replied with a dismissive wave. "But James made some excellent investments based on that roadmap. He felt obligated to bring me in on the opportunity." "You're profiting from the leak that destroyed my career?" I asked incredulously. My father's expression hardened. "Don't be dramatic, Alex. Your career was heading nowhere. Your cloud strategy would have bankrupted us within 3 years. So you sabotaged me instead of having an honest conversation." My voice was rising despite my mother's pleading looks. "I tried talking to you," he snapped. "You wouldn't listen, always thinking you knew better with your fancy new ideas. Reynolds Technologies has succeeded for 40 years because of consistency and reliability, not chasing every technology trend." The pieces suddenly clicked into place. "Allison," I said quietly, "you planted her." The momentary flicker in his eyes told me everything. Allison is James's goddaughter, he finally admitted, draining his wineglass. Harvard, not Stanford. I suggested James offer her the internship when you started recruiting. She's a good kid who follows instructions. Unlike some people, you instructed her to send our confidential information to our biggest competitor? I was shaking now, my mother in tears beside me. I instructed her to help me save my company from my son's arrogance, he shouted. I built Reynolds from nothing. I couldn't sit back and watch you dismantle it with unproven strategies. I couldn't fire my own son. The board wouldn't have supported me without cause. So yes, I created the cause. The coldness in his voice as he admitted destroying my reputation to maintain control of his company left me speechless. I excused myself and left, but not before activating the recording app on my phone that had captured our entire conversation. The next morning, I forwarded the recording to the 3 board members who had voted against my removal, longtime executives who had known me since childhood. Within a week, an emergency board meeting was called. I presented not only the recording but additional evidence I'd gathered once I knew where to look. Emails between my father and James at Axiom, dating back before my removal, suspicious trades of company stock, and Allison's real resume showing her connection to James. The board reinstated me as CEO and removed my father from both his interim position and his board chairmanship. The public story was that he had resigned for health reasons. We filed lawsuits against Axiom and negotiated the return of several key clients by demonstrating we were further along with our cloud transition than Axiom had managed to get with their stolen roadmap. Rebuilding my reputation in the industry has been slower, but we're getting there. The company is back on track with my original strategy, which is already showing positive results. My father hasn't spoken to me since that dinner. My mother tries to mediate, but some betrayals cut too deep for simple reconciliation. The hardest part wasn't losing my job, or even the public humiliation. It was finally accepting that in 40 years, my father had never actually seen me, only the reflection of his own fears and need for control. He'd rather destroy me than let me prove him wrong. That's a wound that doesn't heal with professional vindication. There's family drama, and then there's, I'll orchestrate my son's professional execution rather than have an honest conversation drama. Imagine being so committed to being right that you'd rather demolish your child's career than risk them succeeding in a way you didn't approve of. That's not protecting a legacy. That's just ego in its final boss form. If family betrayal disturbs you, wait until you hear about the nurse who turned a dying woman into social media content. When my mum was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, the doctors gave her 6 months at most. After the initial shock wore off, we decided she'd spend her remaining time at home, surrounded by family and her beloved garden, rather than in a sterile hospital room. I moved back into my childhood bedroom at 34 to help care for her, but both my dad and I still had to work. We needed professional help. The hospice coordinator recommended several private nurses, but Elise stood out immediately. Mid-30s, warm smile, excellent references, and experience specifically with pancreatic cancer patients. During the interview, she spoke with such compassion about end-of-life care and the importance of maintaining dignity during a patient's final journey. My goal is to make this transition as peaceful as possible, she told us, reaching out to squeeze my mum's hand. For all of you. We hired her on the spot. For the first few weeks, Elise seemed like a godsend. She arrived early for her shifts, often stayed late without charging extra hours, and kept meticulous notes about mum's medication, comfort levels, and daily activities. She'd sit for hours reading to mum or helping her write letters to friends and family members she wanted to say goodbye to. I document everything, she explained, showing us her detailed charts on her tablet. It helps me provide continuity of care and spot patterns in pain levels or symptom progression. Mum adored her, telling me privately, if I had to have cancer, at least it brought Elise into our lives. Even my dad, who was falling apart watching his wife of 40 years fade away, found comfort in Elise's steady presence and reassurances. The first odd thing I noticed was Elise's phone. She always kept it nearby, often positioned on a small tripod on the dresser or nightstand in Mum's room. When I asked about it, she explained it contained medical reference apps and allowed her to consult with other nurses if needed. Sometimes I record voice notes about medications or symptoms, she added. It's easier than typing while I'm actively caring for your mother. It made sense. and I had no reason to doubt her. Until Mom mentioned something strange during one of her more lucid mornings. Elise gets so nervous whenever I have a bad spell, she said weakly, always rushing to adjust her phone right when the pain gets bad, or I start getting emotional. I think she's uncomfortable with strong feelings. That didn't sound like the Elise I knew, who seemed completely at ease with all aspects of terminal care. When I mentioned it casually to her, she laughed it off. Your mum's pain medication sometimes causes confusion, she said. I'm just checking the time to document when symptoms intensify. It's all part of providing good care. Again, it sounded reasonable, but something about her explanation didn't sit right with me. That night, after Elise left and Mum was asleep, I sat in my room and decided to look her up online. I told myself I was just being thorough, making sure we hadn't missed anything in our background check. Elise didn't have much of a personal social media presence, just a locked down Facebook page and a professional LinkedIn profile. Nothing unusual there. But when I searched her full name along with nurse and cancer, something unexpected came up. A TikTok and Instagram account called Final Journey, with a profile picture that showed just the lower half of a woman's face, but it was definitely Elise's distinctive smile. The bio read, Hospice nurse sharing the beautiful, heartbreaking reality of end-of-life care, helping families navigate the final journey with grace and dignity. It had over 200,000 followers. Curious, I started watching the videos. Each one featured patients in various stages of terminal illness, their faces always carefully angled away from the camera or blurred out. Elise's compassionate voice narrated their struggles and small victories. Day 47 with my pancreatic warrior. One recent video was captioned, moments of clarity between the storm. And that's when I saw it. My mother's hand with her distinctive opal ring, the one my dad had given her on their 30th anniversary. The camera panned across our living room, carefully avoiding Mum's face but showing enough of our family photos on the wall that anyone who had been to our home would recognize it. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. I fell into a rabbit hole, watching video after video from the past few weeks. There were dozens featuring my mother, her labored breathing during a particularly bad night, her crying while looking at old photo albums, even her confused episode when she temporarily forgot who my dad was, which had devastated him, all captured and shared with hundreds of thousands of strangers. The comments were full of praise for Elise's dedication and raw honesty about the dying process. But there was something else. Links to her Amazon wish list, mentions of donations, and thank yous to specific end-of-life care product companies for sponsoring this content. She was monetizing my mother's final days, and here's where it gets absurd. In some videos, Elise created artificial drama. One clip showed her rushing into Mum's room, urgently checking vitals, captioned, "Sudden crisis, blood pressure dropping dangerously." I remembered that day. Mum had been having a good morning, even eating a little breakfast. There had been no crisis. Elise had simply wanted more engaging content. I couldn't sleep that night, toggling between disbelief, rage, and heartbreak. The next morning, I waited until Elise arrived and Dad left for work. Then I confronted her, my phone open to her social media accounts. "Would you like to explain this?" I asked, showing her a video of my mother from just 2 days earlier. The color drained from her face. For several seconds, she said nothing, then tried to reach for my phone. I pulled it back. "You don't understand," she finally said. "I'm educating people about the reality of hospice care. I'm helping families prepare for what's coming. By exploiting my dying mother for content, by making up medical emergencies that never happened." "I never showed her face," Elise protested, as if that made it acceptable. "And those dramatizations help illustrate what could happen. They're educational." "They're lies," I said, "and you're making money from them." That's when she shifted tactics, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Look, the account generates about $5,000 a month between sponsorships and donations. I could split it with you, 40-60. Your mother's story is really resonating with people. We could help so many families while creating a lasting tribute to her journey." I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. This woman, who we had trusted with my mother's most vulnerable moments, was offering to pay me to continue exploiting her. "Get out," I said quietly. "Now, leave your documentation, the real medical notes, and don't come back." "You're making a mistake," she said, gathering her things. "Your mother loves me. She'll be upset. Not as upset as she'd be knowing you've been broadcasting her suffering to the world." After she left, I called the hospice coordinator and explained everything. They were horrified and immediately sent over another nurse. Then I contacted a lawyer who specialized in medical privacy and elder abuse. The legal process was exhausting but conclusive. Elise had violated numerous privacy laws and ethical standards. We discovered she had done this with at least 7 other families over the past 3 years, building her brand on the backs of dying patients without their knowledge or consent. The state nursing board revoked her license, and the social media platforms banned her accounts for violating their terms of service. We settled out of court for a substantial sum, which we used to establish a training program for healthcare workers about digital ethics and patient dignity in the social media age. Mom never knew what happened. We simply told her Elise had a family emergency and couldn't return. She passed away 2 months later, peacefully, with only those who truly loved her present. The cruelest part wasn't just the invasion of privacy or the exploitation of Mum's suffering. It was that we had genuinely believed Elise cared about her. Those moments reading together, writing letters, holding hands through pain episodes, all of it had been performance art for her audience. Every tender moment had been calculated content. In the digital age, I guess even dying isn't private anymore. But thanks to our case, there are now stronger protections in place for vulnerable patients. I just wish my mom hadn't had to be the unwitting example of why those protections are necessary. The absolute ghoulish nature of this, turning someone's final days into content for likes and sponsorships. We've officially reached the monetizing human suffering level of social media hell. The fact that she offered to split the profits like they were business partners in this macabre enterprise just shows how completely detached from basic human decency some people have become. But this pales in comparison to how one tutor exploited a teenage boy to steal company secrets. My son Jason has always been brilliant with literature and history, but math and science never came easy to him. By junior year, he was struggling to maintain his GPA for college applications, particularly in calculus. As a single father running a pharmaceutical company, I couldn't provide the help he needed, so when his school counselor recommended Vanessa Chen, a graduate student in applied mathematics, it seemed perfect. Vanessa came with stellar credentials, top of her class at MIT, recommendations from professors, and experience tutoring high school students. At 24, she was young enough to relate to Jason, but mature enough to command respect. During our initial meeting, she was professional, articulate, and genuinely seemed to understand Jason's learning blocks. "I specialize in helping students who process information differently," she explained. "It's not about drilling formulas, it's about finding the way math makes sense to Jason specifically." Within weeks, Jason's grades improved dramatically, his confidence grew, and for the first time, he actually enjoyed math. Vanessa quickly became a fixture in our home, coming by 3 times a week. I was grateful, relieved really, and increased her already generous hourly rate as a bonus. "You're changing his life," I told her one evening as she was packing up. "I can't thank you enough." "Jason's special," she said with a smile. "I enjoy our time together." Something in her tone should have alerted me, but I was too pleased with the results to notice. Jason was happier than I'd seen him in years, often talking about Vanessa at dinner, how brilliant she was, how she made complex concepts simple. I was just thankful he had found a mentor who connected with him. Then came the breaking point. I came home early from a business trip, hoping to surprise Jason. When I walked in, I heard music coming from his room. I went upstairs to say hello and opened his door without knocking. A parental mistake I immediately regretted. Jason and Vanessa jumped apart on his bed, clearly in the middle of something far beyond calculus. "Dad," Jason shouted, pulling his shirt back on, "you're supposed to be in Chicago until tomorrow." Vanessa gathered her things without making eye contact. "I should go," she mumbled. "Yes, you should," I said coldly. "And don't come back." After she left, Jason and I had the most difficult conversation of our lives. He was furious with me for overreacting, insisting that their relationship was consensual and genuine. At 17, he was technically under the age of consent in our state, but he didn't see himself as a victim. "We love each other," he insisted. "She's not like other girls my age. She understands me." I tried to explain the power dynamics, the inappropriateness of a teacher-student relationship, but he wouldn't hear it. He stormed out and spent the night at a friend's house. I sat in my home office trying to process what had happened when something made me check my work laptop. As Chief Research Officer at Meridian Pharmaceuticals, I had access to our most sensitive research data, including the formula for MDX7, a groundbreaking treatment for autoimmune diseases we were preparing to patent. The laptop showed multiple logins during times when I was at work, but Vanessa was supposedly tutoring Jason at home. Files had been accessed, particularly those related to MDX7's molecular structure and clinical trial results. That's when everything unraveled. I called our security team immediately. They confirmed unauthorized access to our servers from my home IP address using my credentials. Someone had installed keylogging software on my laptop, capturing my passwords. The timing aligned perfectly with Vanessa's tutoring sessions. A deeper background check revealed Vanessa Chen wasn't who she claimed to be. Her real name was Vanessa Zhao, and she wasn't a graduate student at all. She worked for Nova Biolabs, our main competitor, who had been trying to develop a similar drug without success. She had targeted my son specifically, using him to gain access to my home, my office, and eventually, our company's intellectual property. When I told Jason what I'd discovered, he refused to believe it. "You're making this up because you don't approve of her," he said. It wasn't until I showed him the evidence, her real employment records, the data breach reports, timestamps showing she accessed my computer while he was in the shower after their study sessions, that the truth began to sink in. She used me?" he asked, his voice small and broken in a way I hadn't heard since his mother died when he was 10. None of it was real? And that's when things went from bad to unhinged. As we were talking, Jason's phone lit up with a message from Vanessa. "Delete all our texts now. Your dad knows." Seeing this message in real time was the final confirmation we needed. Jason, devastated and now angry, agreed to help. Under the guidance of our company's legal team and with police approval, he arranged to meet Vanessa at a coffee shop. He wore a wire, and I watched from a surveillance van as my teenage son confronted the woman who had manipulated him. "My dad thinks you're just using me to get to his research," Jason said, his voice remarkably steady. "Tell me that's not true." Vanessa reached for his hand across the table. "Of course it's not true, Jason. Your dad is paranoid because of his work. He doesn't understand what we have." "Then why did you ask me to delete our texts? Why did you want me to show you Dad's office that time you said you were interested in seeing where great scientific discoveries happen?" Her demeanor shifted slightly. "That was just curiosity. You know how interested I am in your life, in everything about you." "Including the MDX7 formula?" he asked, dropping the name of our drug project. There was a brief flicker in her eyes before she recovered. "I don't know what that is, Jason. That's weird. Because you accessed those files multiple times from my dad's computer. The IT team has the logs." What happened next showed her true colors. Realizing she was caught, Vanessa completely transformed. The warm, caring tutor disappeared, replaced by a cold professional. "You should be flattered," she said with a dismissive wave. "Most boys your age would be thrilled to have the attention of an older woman. It's not like you were hard to manipulate. So desperate for validation, so eager to please. All I had to do was laugh at your jokes and act impressed by your mediocre insights." The officers moved in and arrested her on the spot. As they led her away, she looked back at Jason with pure contempt. "You think this will stop anything? The formula's already been sent. MDX7 will be Nova's breakthrough, not Meridian's." But she was wrong. Our security team had already traced the data breach and implemented countermeasures. More importantly, we now had evidence of corporate espionage and, given Jason's age, statutory rape. Nova Biolabs tried to distance themselves from Vanessa's unauthorized actions, but emails proved executives had approved the plan to target my son to get to me. The legal fallout was massive. Nova faced criminal charges for industrial espionage. Their stock collapsed when the scandal went public, and we won a settlement that exceeded $200 million in damages. They had already begun production based on our stolen formula, which provided irrefutable evidence of theft. For Jason, though, the damage was more personal. He required extensive therapy to process the betrayal and manipulation. His grades dropped again, and he became withdrawn, suspicious of anyone who showed interest in him. The hardest part wasn't the legal battle or even the corporate fallout. It was helping my son understand that he wasn't stupid for being deceived, that he wasn't an accomplice in the theft, that he was a victim of a predator who had been trained specifically to target and manipulate him. 3 years later, Jason is doing better. He's in college now, studying cybersecurity of all things. No one should go through what I did, he told me when he chose his major. The experience changed him, made him more cautious, less trusting, but also more determined to protect others. As for me, I've implemented rigorous security protocols at home and work. No sensitive materials leave the office. All devices have tracking software, and background checks for anyone who enters our lives are exhaustive. Some might call it paranoia, but when you've seen how easily trust can be weaponized against the people you love most, caution seems like the only rational response. The elaborate lengths people will go to for corporate espionage is wild enough, but targeting a teenager's emotional vulnerability to get there? That's crossing about 17 ethical lines at once. Imagine sitting in a corporate meeting where someone pitches, "Hey, what if we romantically manipulate the CEO's underage son?" And everyone just nods along like it's a normal Tuesday strategy session. Now imagine your special day being systematically ruined by someone you never suspected. I never thought I'd be one of those people with a wedding horror story, but here we are. Jake and I had been together for 3 years when he proposed. We were both 29, established in our careers and ready to build a life together. At least, that's what I thought. Planning a wedding while both working full-time was overwhelming, so we decided to hire a professional. 3 planners were recommended by friends, but Melissa Winters stood out immediately. Her portfolio was impressive, beautiful personalized weddings with glowing testimonials. During our first meeting, she was warm, organized, and seemed genuinely excited about our vision. "I believe your wedding day should reflect your unique love story," she said, showing us photos of her previous events. "No cookie-cutter celebrations." Jake was instantly comfortable with her, which I took as a good sign. He usually hated these kinds of planning discussions, but was surprisingly engaged in our meetings with Melissa. I was relieved he was taking an interest rather than leaving everything to me. The first 2 months of planning went smoothly. Melissa secured our dream venue, a historic mansion with beautiful gardens, and recommended vendors within our budget. She was responsive to texts and emails, sometimes replying late at night with new ideas or solutions to problems. Then small issues started cropping up. The florist called, confused about the deposit Melissa was supposed to have sent. "We can't hold your date without it," they explained. When I mentioned it to Melissa, she assured me it had been sent and showed me a confirmation email. A week later, the florist confirmed receiving it, apologizing for the mix-up, but then the caterer called with the same issue, then the photographer. Each time, Melissa had an explanation: bank delays, email miscommunications, vendor disorganization. She always fixed things, but not without stressful days of uncertainty. "These things happen," Jake said when I expressed concern. "That's why we hired a professional to handle it." Then came the invitation disaster. Our carefully designed invitations went out with the wrong time printed for the ceremony, 2 p.m. instead of 4 p.m. Melissa was mortified, immediately sending correction cards at her expense. "The printer made the change without confirming," she explained. "I've fired them and found a new vendor." I started keeping closer tabs on the planning process, double-checking with vendors myself. Melissa seemed slightly annoyed by this, but assured me she understood. "You want everything to be perfect. I respect that." That's when everything unraveled. 6 weeks before the wedding, we had our tasting with the caterer. The food was delicious, and we finalized our menu with excitement. But that night, Jake and I, along with both sets of parents who had attended, became violently ill with food poisoning. Everyone except Melissa, who had already eaten earlier. The caterer was horrified, swearing they had never had an incident like this before. They conducted tests but found nothing wrong with their kitchen or food preparation. It remained a mystery, but the damage to our confidence was done. "Maybe we should look for another planner," I suggested to Jake that week. "Too many things are going wrong." His reaction shocked me. He became defensive, almost angry. "Melissa is doing everything she can. These aren't her fault. You're being paranoid and ungrateful." The intensity of his response made me step back. I'd never seen Jake react this way. He was usually the first to question poor service, yet here he was, defending Melissa despite a pattern of disasters. That's when I started noticing other things. How Melissa and Jake seemed to have inside jokes I wasn't part of. how she would touch his arm or shoulder when making a point, how their eyes would meet across the room in a way that felt oddly intimate. When I mentioned these observations to my maid of honor, she admitted she'd noticed it too, but hadn't wanted to add to my stress. "There's something off about how familiar they are," she said. "It doesn't feel like a normal client-planner relationship." I decided to do something I'm not proud of. While Jake was showering one evening, I checked his phone. There were no suspicious texts, but I noticed he had a second email app installed, hidden in a folder on his second screen. When I opened it, I found hundreds of exchanges between him and Melissa, dating back to when we first hired her. And here's where it gets absurd. The emails revealed that Melissa wasn't just any wedding planner. She was Jake's college girlfriend of 3 years, the one he'd described as the one that got away early in our relationship. They had reconnected when her name came up on the recommended planners list. Not a coincidence, but because she had deliberately built her business in our city after learning through mutual friends that Jake had settled here. The emails started professionally enough, but quickly evolved into reminiscing about their past, then flirting, then explicit exchanges about their renewed physical relationship. They had been meeting at her office under the guise of wedding planning sessions. Jake insisted on handling a loan to reduce my stress. But that wasn't even the worst part. The emails also detailed how Melissa had been systematically sabotaging our wedding plans. The deposits she claimed to send but mysteriously didn't arrive, never sent. The invitation time error, deliberate. The food poisoning. She had added something to the samples our parents and we ate. Her plan, which she and Jake discussed openly, was two-pronged. Punish me for stealing Jake while proving to him that she still had power over him. The ultimate goal was for Jake to call off the wedding, realizing he still loved Melissa. In her words, "When everything falls apart, I'll be the one to pick up the pieces, like I always did in college." Jake's responses were the most painful to read. While he occasionally expressed concern about hurting me, he was clearly enthralled with her. "No one has ever understood me like you do," he wrote. "Rebecca's nice, but what we have again now, is something deeper." I took screenshots of everything, then went to stay with my sister that night, leaving Jake a note saying I needed space to think about the wedding. He called repeatedly, his messages growing increasingly frantic, but I didn't respond. Instead, I spent the next day contacting all our vendors directly, discovering the full extent of Melissa's sabotage. Our venue hadn't received the final payment, despite Jake and I providing the money to Melissa. The caterer had been told we wanted to downgrade our menu. The photographer had been given the wrong ceremony time. The list went on and on. 1 week before the wedding, I finally responded to Jake, asking him to meet me at a public coffee shop. When he arrived, I placed a folder on the table containing printouts of his emails with Melissa and documentation of all her sabotage. "I know everything," I said calmly. "The wedding is off." His face went through a series of emotions: shock, guilt, anger, then a pathetic attempt at denial. "These are taken out of context," he tried. "Melissa and I have history, yes, but these don't mean what you think. The context is you've been sleeping with our wedding planner while she deliberately ruins the wedding I've been paying for," I replied. "I think the meaning is pretty clear." He finally broke down, admitting everything. The affair had started almost immediately after we hired her. The sabotage had been her idea initially, but he had gone along with it, even suggesting some of the problems himself. He claimed he had been confused, caught between his history with Melissa and his commitment to me. "I do love you," he insisted. "I got carried away with the nostalgia and excitement. We can fix this." "There's nothing to fix," I told him. "The wedding's cancelled, but the party isn't." He looked confused, so I explained my plan. I had already contacted all our vendors, explained the situation, and reworked the contracts in my name only. The venue, catering, flowers, music, all of it would still happen on our wedding day. But instead of a wedding, I was hosting a dodged-a-bullet celebration with my friends and family. "Your things are packed at the apartment," I added. "You have until tomorrow to pick them up. My brother will be there to make sure you only take what's yours." The party was actually amazing. I sent a brief, honest explanation to our guests, and almost everyone on my side came to support me. We turned the would-be wedding into a celebration of new beginnings. Jake's family, horrified by what he'd done, sent me heartfelt apologies. His mother even attended briefly to give me a hug and return the family heirloom necklace she had planned to give me at the rehearsal dinner. As for Melissa's professional reputation, it didn't survive. I didn't have to do much, simply shared the evidence with the other wedding planners who had recommended her and a few key vendors. The industry blacklisted her, and her social media was flooded with comments from outraged people who had heard the story. She tried to rebrand and relocate, but in the age of Google, her sabotage follows her everywhere. Jake and Melissa actually did get together after all this, but it lasted less than 6 months. Turns out a relationship built on betrayal and sabotage isn't particularly stable. Last I heard, he was trying to apologize and explain himself through mutual friends. I've blocked every possible form of contact. It's been 2 years, and I'm still single, but happily so. The experience taught me to trust my instincts when something feels off, and to be more careful about who I let into my life. Sometimes the red flags are subtle, like a fiancé who suddenly defends poor service from someone he should have no particular loyalty to. Lesson learned. The concept of hiring your secret ex to plan the wedding to your current fiancé is already wild, but then actively participating in sabotaging your own wedding. That's next level commitment to making terrible life choices. It's like watching someone dig their own grave while meticulously selecting which shovel would look best in the wedding photos. But trust becomes even more complicated when your everyday ride turns into something much more sinister. After my divorce from Elena was finalized last year, I moved into a downtown apartment closer to my office. The split wasn't amicable. She felt entitled to more than half of everything, including my family's lake house that predated our marriage. While our lawyers battled it out in a seemingly endless property settlement, I was trying to rebuild my life. Part of my new routine was using a rideshare app for my daily commute. Driving and parking downtown was a nightmare, and the train didn't run close enough to my building. The convenience factor won me over immediately. Tap a button, car arrives, no hassle. About 3 weeks in, I started noticing something odd. The same driver, Marcus, kept picking up my ride requests. At first, I thought nothing of it. Maybe he worked that area consistently, or the algorithm favored drivers who'd provided service before. He was friendly enough, mid-30s, well-spoken, with an immaculate black sedan that always smelled faintly of pine. "Good morning, Michael," he'd say, already knowing my preferred route. "The usual today?" As the coincidences continued, Marcus picking me up 3, sometimes 4 days a week, we developed what I thought was a casual friendship. He remembered details about my work projects I'd mentioned while on phone calls. He asked follow-up questions about my weekend plans I'd briefly mentioned days earlier. I was impressed by his memory and attention to detail, even mentioning to colleagues how rideshare service had become surprisingly personalized. "Best driver in the city," I told a coworker. "Always on time, remembers everything. The app should give him a bonus or something." Then came the first red flag. One Saturday morning, I was at my local coffee shop, a small place about 15 blocks from my apartment that I'd discovered during a weekend walk. As I waited for my order, Marcus walked in. He seemed momentarily surprised to see me, then quickly recovered. "Michael, small world, huh?" he said, extending his hand. "I live just around the corner. Been coming here for years." I brushed it off as coincidence, even though something felt slightly off about the encounter. The coffee shop wasn't exactly on the beaten path, and his reaction seemed rehearsed. But that wasn't even the worst part. Over the next 2 weeks, I spotted Marcus at my gym, at the grocery store I frequented, and once, most disturbingly, standing across the street from my apartment building when I came home late one evening. When he saw me notice him, he quickly walked away. That's when I decided to take a break from the rideshare service. I started taking the train, despite the inconvenience. Within 2 days, I received a text message. "We've noticed you haven't used our service recently. As one of our valued customers, we'd like to understand if there's any way we can improve your experience. Please reply with any feedback." It came from a number claiming to be customer service, but something about the wording felt off. When I checked the app, there were no corresponding messages in my account. I called the official customer service line, and they confirmed they hadn't sent any texts. Then came the breaking point. I was having dinner at a steakhouse downtown when I spotted Marcus at a corner table. He wasn't alone. He was dining with my ex-wife. They were engaged in intense conversation, heads close together, looking at something on his phone. I paid my bill quickly and positioned myself outside where I could see them, but they couldn't easily spot me. When they eventually left, I followed at a distance. They walked to a nearby park and continued their conversation on a bench. I managed to find a spot close enough to overhear snippets without being noticed. He's definitely suspicious, Marcus was saying. Stopped using the service entirely. But you have everything, Elena asked. The schedule, the contacts, the recordings? All of it. The spyware's still active on his phone. I can see every text, email, and call. Got his banking passwords too. And the location tracking still works even though he's not using the app. My blood ran cold. I moved away before they could spot me, my mind racing. Once home, I checked my phone and discovered an unfamiliar app buried in a system folder. I immediately shut off my phone and went to an electronics store to buy a new one. I contacted a cybersecurity friend who confirmed my worst fears. My phone had been thoroughly compromised. The next day, I hired a private investigator who documented Marcus following me to work on the train. The PI also found that Marcus wasn't just any driver. He was a former IT security specialist who now did consulting work. Within a week, we had gathered substantial evidence. Photos of Marcus with Elena, records of him picking up my rides at statistically impossible rates, evidence of the spyware, and even recordings my PI managed to obtain of them discussing their arrangement. And here's where it gets absurd. According to those recordings, Elena had hired Marcus 3 months earlier to track my movements and gain access to my personal information. She was looking for leverage in our property dispute, evidence of hidden assets, new relationships she could use against me, or anything that might give her an advantage. Marcus had deliberately positioned himself as my regular driver, using the rides to clone my phone and gain access to my accounts. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. I contacted my lawyer immediately, and we filed for emergency restraining orders against both of them. We also reported everything to the police and the rideshare company. The company was horrified when they saw the evidence. They banned Marcus permanently and implemented additional background check measures for all drivers. In court, the judge was furious. Not only did Elena lose any advantageous position in our property settlement, but she was also ordered to pay my legal fees. The lake house issue was settled definitively in my favor, and she received significantly less than she would have under our original settlement terms. Marcus faced more serious consequences. He was charged with multiple counts of illegal surveillance, computer fraud, privacy violations, and stalking. As part of a plea deal, he provided complete information about all the data he had collected and how he had compromised my devices. He received a suspended sentence, hefty fine, and is prohibited from working in any IT security role for 5 years. The most disturbing aspect of the whole ordeal wasn't just the invasion of privacy, it was the calculated nature of it all. For months, I had been having friendly conversations with someone who was meticulously documenting my life, recording my calls, and reporting back to my ex-wife. Every seemingly casual question about my weekend plans or work projects had been fishing for information they could use against me. I've since moved to a new apartment in a building with better security. I rarely use rideshare services now, and when I do, I use a prepaid phone with minimal permissions granted to any apps. It might seem paranoid, but once you've had someone weaponize your daily commute against you, ordinary caution doesn't feel like enough anymore. The one silver lining, Elena's desperate tactics backfired completely, leaving her with less than she would have received otherwise. As my lawyer put it, sometimes the best strategy is letting your opponent destroy their own case. I couldn't have said it better myself. The sheer commitment to evil here is almost impressive. Imagine spending months pretending to be someone's friendly neighborhood driver, all while systematically invading every corner of their digital life. That's not just crossing boundaries, that's demolishing them, building a highway over the rubble, and then setting up a toll booth. Even more disturbing is when the person you trust with your mental health has a hidden agenda. I never thought I'd be so grateful for my paranoia, but it probably saved my company. 2 years ago, I was riding a roller coaster of startup life. Amazing highs when we secured our first major clients, crushing lows when our initial product launch had critical bugs that took weeks to fix. I'd founded Techalign, a software platform designed to help small businesses streamline their customer management systems, after 6 years of working for larger tech firms and spotting a gap in the market. Being a female founder in tech isn't easy. I was constantly second-guessed, overlooked in networking events, and had to work twice as hard to be taken half as seriously. The pressure was intense, and after a particularly rough quarter where I barely slept 4 hours a night for weeks, I finally admitted I needed help. My doctor recommended therapy, specifically Dr. Amelia Winters, who specialized in working with entrepreneurs and executives. From our first session, I felt an immediate connection with Dr. Winters. She was warm, insightful, and seemed to genuinely understand the unique pressures I faced. She had a calm, measured way of speaking that made me feel safe enough to unpack all my anxieties and insecurities. The startup world creates impossible standards, she told me during our third session. You're expected to be invincible, but acknowledging your humanity isn't weakness. It's essential for sustainable success. I found myself opening up more than I expected, not just about my depression and anxiety, but about the business challenges I was facing. Our sessions became a sanctuary where I could vent my frustrations without judgment. I often talked about my main competitor, Blake Harrington, CEO of Nimbus Tech. They'd launched 6 months after us with a suspiciously similar product, though their target market was slightly more upscale. Blake had deeper pockets and industry connections I lacked, but our product was more innovative. At least, it had been initially. It's like he can read my mind, I complained to Dr. Winters after Blake launched a feature we'd been quietly developing. We haven't publicly mentioned our plans for an integrated analytics dashboard, yet somehow Nimbus announced the exact same feature 2 weeks before our planned launch. Dr. Winters was sympathetic. That must be incredibly frustrating. Tell me more about this analytics dashboard. What makes yours different from what's already on the market? Looking back, I should have noticed her questions were becoming increasingly specific about business strategy rather than focusing on my mental health. But when you're in therapy, you expect to be asked probing questions. You don't expect them to be corporate espionage. Over the next few months, a disturbing pattern emerged. Every major move we planned was somehow anticipated by Nimbus. A pricing restructure we'd worked on for months. Blake announced an almost identical model days before our rollout. A partnership with a complementary service provider. Nimbus swooped in with a better offer at the last minute. 3 potential investors who'd been enthusiastic about joining our next funding round suddenly went cold without explanation. That's when everything unraveled. I started to wonder if we had a leak somewhere in our small team of 12. I implemented tighter information controls, compartmentalizing projects, and limiting access to our strategic roadmap. But the leaks continued. The only consistent factor was that each compromised initiative had been discussed in my therapy sessions. My suspicions about Dr. Winters grew when she began asking unusually detailed questions about an upcoming feature release, questions that went far beyond what would be relevant for my psychological well-being. So, this new payment processing integration, you mentioned it's using a proprietary encryption method. Is that something your team developed in-house, or did you partner with a security firm? I gave her a vague answer and left that session feeling deeply unsettled. That night, I developed a plan to confirm my suspicions. I created a completely fabricated story about a partnership deal we were supposedly finalizing with Apex Solutions, a well-respected data security company that would give us a significant market advantage. Apex was a real company, but we had no actual discussions with them. In my next session, I casually mentioned this fictional partnership, adding specific but completely made-up details about implementation timelines and contract terms. Dr. Winters seemed especially interested, asking several follow-up questions that I answered with convincing but entirely fictional specifics. 3 days later, my phone lit up with a text from a contact at Apex. Blake Harrington from Nimbus just reached out about a potential partnership. Mentioned you might be in talks with us too? What's happening? And suddenly the whole plan fell apart. I knew immediately what was happening, but needed proof. I hired a private investigator who discovered that Dr. Amelia Winters was actually Blake Harrington's sister-in-law. She had deliberately targeted me as a patient after Blake identified me as his primary competition, using our confidential therapy sessions to gather business intelligence. She had even moved her practice to be closer to my office shortly before our first appointment, specifically to make herself a convenient option when I sought therapy. The level of calculation was staggering. For nearly 8 months, this woman had sat across from me, nodding sympathetically as I poured out my deepest fears and business strategies, then relayed everything to Blake. They had used my own vulnerability, my struggle with depression and burnout, as a weapon against me. I documented everything meticulously: the pattern of leaks corresponding to topics discussed in therapy, the fabricated Apex partnership that Nimbus immediately pursued, and the PI's findings about Dr. Winter's relationship to Blake. Then I took action on multiple fronts. First, I filed a formal complaint with the State Licensing Board for Psychologists, providing all my evidence of Dr. Winter's ethical violations. I also filed a civil lawsuit against both Dr. Winters and Blake Harrington for breach of confidentiality, fraudulent misrepresentation, and unfair business practices. The licensing board moved surprisingly quickly. They conducted their own investigation and ultimately revoked Dr. Winter's license to practice. The lawsuit took longer, but eventually resulted in a $3.2 million settlement, funds that allowed me to not only stabilize my company, but significantly expand our operations. The publicity from the case had an unexpected benefit. It highlighted the ethical violations of our competitor, while positioning us as the underdog who had been wronged but persevered. Several of the investors who had mysteriously backed out returned with renewed interest, explaining that Blake had shared concerns about our company's stability that they now realized were manipulated information. 2 years later, TechAlign is thriving. We've tripled our client base, doubled our team, and just closed a successful Series B funding round. Blake's company is still operating, but they've lost significant market share and investor confidence. As for me, I eventually found a legitimate therapist who has helped me work through not only my original depression, but also the trust issues that inevitably developed after such a profound betrayal. The experience fundamentally changed how I approach business. We've implemented rigorous ethical guidelines in our company culture and operations. I'm also working with a nonprofit that advocates for stronger regulations around confidentiality in professional services. No one should have their vulnerability weaponized against them the way mine was. The irony doesn't escape me that in trying to destroy my business through unethical means, Blake and Dr. Winters ultimately made it stronger. Sometimes your competitors really do give you your best material, just not in the way they intended. The sheer calculated betrayal here is on another level, taking something as sacred as the therapist-patient relationship and corrupting it for corporate espionage. That's violating basic human decency, with a side order of, let me also destroy professional ethics while I'm at it. When someone treats your mental health struggles as an intelligence-gathering opportunity, they've basically entered the villain origin story phase of their career. But workplace betrayals come in many forms, as this next story about a recording janitor demonstrates. I never expected my career to implode over a single bad night, but that's exactly what happened. As the regional manager for Vertex Solutions, a prestigious tech firm specializing in consumer electronics, I oversaw operations for our entire West Coast division. I had climbed the corporate ladder methodically over 15 years: business degree, entry-level position, middle management, and finally, at 38, regional manager with a corner office and a team of 40 reporting to me. The trouble started during our disastrous Q3 product launch. We had developed what was supposed to be our flagship smartphone accessory, but our Chinese manufacturing partners had delivered components with serious quality issues. The defect rate was nearly 30%, forcing us to delay the launch and issue embarrassing explanations to our retail partners. Our stock took a hit, and the CEO was breathing down my neck for explanations. After a particularly brutal conference call with headquarters, I stayed late at the office trying to salvage what I could of the situation. Everyone else had gone home, or so I thought. Around 10 p.m., frustrated beyond measure and believing I was alone, I completely lost it. I paced my office, unleashing a tirade about our manufacturing partners that went well beyond professional criticism into outright racist territory. These Chinese factories are taking us for idiots, I ranted to the empty room. They smile and bow and promise quality, then send us garbage and expect us to pay premium prices. It got worse from there, much worse. I used slurs, mocked accents, made derogatory comments about Chinese business practices that played into every ugly stereotype imaginable. It was a 5-minute meltdown that I'm deeply ashamed of now. It wasn't who I thought I was, but stress has a way of revealing ugly truths we hide even from ourselves. When I finally calmed down, I packed up my things and headed home, completely unaware that Miguel, one of our night janitors, had been emptying trash cans just outside my office and had recorded most of my rant on his phone. If Miguel had posted that recording online immediately or sent it to HR, I would have been fired on the spot, and rightfully so. But he didn't. Instead, he did something much more calculating. He waited and watched. Over the next few months, I had no idea I was being observed. But Miguel, who typically worked quietly in the background, began paying close attention to my management style. He noticed how I spoke condescendingly to administrative staff, interrupted female colleagues in meetings, and occasionally made off-color jokes that made some team members visibly uncomfortable. None of it was quite as egregious as my private meltdown, but it established a pattern of behavior. Then came the breaking point. At our annual company gala, our CEO Bernard Klein made an announcement that changed everything. I'd like to introduce someone many of you know only as part of our maintenance staff, but who will soon be joining our management team. Miguel Reyes has been working nights here while completing his MBA at Stanford, where he graduated top of his class last month. He's also, I'm proud to say, recently became my son-in-law after dating my daughter Lisa for the past 3 years. The room erupted in applause while I nearly choked on my champagne. Miguel, dressed in an impeccable suit rather than his usual maintenance uniform, made his way to the stage, looking nothing like the quiet janitor who emptied my trash. He gave a gracious speech about how working in maintenance had given him unique insights into the company's operations and culture, insights most executives never get to see. "You learn a lot about people when they don't think you're watching or listening," he said, his eyes briefly meeting mine across the room. Some of it inspiring, some of it educational in other ways. The next week, Bernard announced that Miguel would be heading up our newly formed Ethics and Workplace Culture Committee, tasked with addressing some concerning reports about behavior within certain departments. I knew immediately what was coming. Sure enough, I was called into a meeting with Miguel and 2 HR representatives the following day. Miguel was professional, not vindictive, as he played the recording of my racist tirade, followed by several other recordings and documented incidents showing my pattern of disrespectful behavior. "We have more than enough here to terminate your employment immediately," Miguel said calmly, "but I believe people can change if given the right motivation and tools." What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. Instead of firing me, Miguel offered an alternative. I could resign immediately, or I could accept a demotion to assistant manager, complete an extensive sensitivity and leadership training program, and work under probationary status for 1 year. The choice was mine. Pride told me to quit, to walk out rather than face the humiliation of demotion and remedial training. But reality, mortgage payments, 2 kids in private school, and a job market that wouldn't be kind to a manager fired for racist comments, made the decision for me. "I'll take the training and demotion," I said, unable to meet his eyes. The next 6 months were the most humbling of my professional life. I went from having my own corner office to sharing a cubicle. My salary was cut by 30%. I spent weekends in intensive diversity training and weeknights reading assigned materials on inclusive leadership. Many colleagues who learned about the recording kept their distance. Those who had been on the receiving end of my condescension didn't bother hiding their satisfaction at my fall from grace. Through it all, Miguel was firm but fair. He never publicly shamed me or brought up the incident once I had begun the remediation process. Instead, he focused on measurable improvements in my communication and leadership approach. When I genuinely made progress, he acknowledged it. When I slipped back into old habits, he called me out privately but directly. 2 years later, after I had completed my probation and worked my way back to a team lead position, Miguel became my direct supervisor following a departmental reorganization. By this point, he had proven himself as one of the company's most effective executives, bringing fresh perspectives that came from having worked at every level of the organization. Under his leadership, our entire department's culture transformed. The cutthroat, blame-shifting atmosphere that I had both suffered under and perpetuated gave way to something more collaborative and humane. Productivity improved, turnover decreased, employee satisfaction scores rose dramatically. As for me, I won't pretend I'm a completely changed person. Change that profound doesn't happen overnight, or even in a couple of years, but I am more conscious of how I speak to and about others. I catch myself before making assumptions or dismissive comments. I listen more than I talk in meetings. These changes didn't just make me a better manager, they made me a better person at home too. The irony isn't lost on me that the invisible employee I never really noticed saved my career by not destroying it when he had every right to do so. Miguel could have ended my professional life with one email containing that audio file. Instead, he used it as leverage to force me to confront my worst behaviors and actually address them, rather than just move to another company to continue the same toxic patterns. Today, Miguel and I have what I'd cautiously call a good working relationship. Not friendship, that would be a stretch given our history, but mutual professional respect. He recently recommended me to lead a new project team, saying he chose me because I've demonstrated the capacity to learn from mistakes and the humility to accept criticism, qualities he said were rarer in management than technical skills. I still cringe remembering that night and the things I said, but unlike many stories of career implosions, mine came with an unexpected second act, one that I try to earn every day. The absolute chef's kiss of karmic justice here. Talk about playing the long game. Miguel didn't just catch a racist rant, he observed the whole ecosystem of bad behavior, documented it methodically, and then revealed himself as basically corporate royalty. It's like watching someone dig their own professional grave in slow motion, while their future boss hands them a better shovel. And for our final story, imagine discovering the charming barista at your local coffee shop has an entirely different agenda. For 6 months, I worked on my tech startup from the same coffee shop near my apartment. It was a cozy, independent place called The Daily Grind, with reliable Wi-Fi, great cold brew, and the perfect corner table that let me spread out my notes while watching the entrance. As a first-time founder working on an app to revolutionize small business inventory management, I was burning through my savings and couldn't afford office space yet. The coffee shop became my de facto headquarters. Emma started working there about 2 weeks after I established my routine. She was in her mid-20s with short dark hair and glasses that gave her a bookish look. Unlike some of the other baristas who barely acknowledged regulars, Emma made a point to chat with me whenever she was on shift. "Working on that startup again?" she'd ask, bringing me refills I hadn't even ordered yet. "How's the development coming along?" At first, her questions were casual, the kind of small talk any friendly barista might make. But over time, she showed genuine interest in what I was building. She'd ask thoughtful questions about market strategy or funding approaches that demonstrated surprising business acumen. "Oh, I minored in business before dropping out to figure out what I really want," she explained when I commented on her knowledge. "I find startups fascinating, all that innovation and disruption. Yours sounds especially interesting." Over months, I began to look forward to our conversations. In the isolating world of early entrepreneurship, having someone to bounce ideas off who wasn't directly involved was refreshing. Emma became something between a sounding board and a friend. I'd save up small victories to share with her. Our first beta test success, a promising meeting with an angel investor, a breakthrough in our algorithm. "You know, what you're doing with predictive inventory could really transform how small retailers compete with the big chains," she said one day, leaning against my table during her break. "Have you considered approaching retail associations for partnerships instead of going direct to business?" It was a brilliant suggestion I hadn't considered. I incorporated it into our strategy immediately and mentioned to my small team how a friend had provided the insight. My startup InvenTrack was gaining momentum. We had a working prototype, interest from several investors, and were preparing for a seed funding round that would finally let us hire more developers and move into a real office. The future looked promising. Then strange coincidences began happening. A competing startup, Retail Edge, suddenly pivoted their product to include features eerily similar to ones we hadn't publicly announced yet. An investor who had been enthusiastic about our upcoming round emailed to withdraw interest without explanation. A retail association I'd been in talks with for a potential pilot program stopped responding to emails after initially being excited about our approach. After the third such incident, my co-founder Alex suggested we might have a leak. "We should feed different information to each team member and see what shows up in the market," he proposed. I hated the idea of testing my small, trusted team this way, but I agreed it was necessary. We implemented the canary trap, giving each of our 5 team members slightly different information about upcoming features or strategies. Then we waited to see which version would surface externally. That's when everything unraveled, but not in the way we expected. One morning, I arrived at the coffee shop much earlier than usual due to a schedule change. Emma hadn't seen me come in as she was busy with the morning rush. I headed to my regular table and noticed she had just cleared it, though there was no one waiting for a seat in the half-empty cafe. As I approached, I saw her quickly photographing my notebook that I'd left there the previous day. She was holding her phone directly over the pages, methodically capturing each one. When she saw me, she fumbled, quickly shoving her phone in her pocket. "Oh, you're early today," she said with a nervous laugh. "I was just, clearing this for the morning clean." "My notebook was closed when I left yesterday," I said quietly. "You opened it to take photos." She maintained her innocent barista persona, denying everything and suggesting I was mistaken. I didn't confront her further, but for the first time in 6 months, I didn't stay to work. I went home, sick with the realization of what might be happening. The next day, I returned but sat at a different table. Emma seemed disappointed but didn't comment. When her shift ended, I followed her. Not my proudest moment, but I needed to know. Instead of heading to what I assumed would be her apartment, she walked directly to a downtown office building. Using the directory in the lobby, I confirmed my worst fear. It was the headquarters of Capital Tech, the parent company of Retail Edge, our most aggressive competitor. And here's where it gets absurd. Through a former colleague who now worked at Capital Tech, I discovered Emma was actually Emma Chen, their director of competitive intelligence. She had never been a barista before taking the job at the Daily Grind. Her entire coffee shop persona was fabricated after Capital Tech identified our startup as a potential threat. They had specifically targeted me, renting an apartment near my known address, tracking my habits, and placing their corporate spy in the very coffee shop I frequented to gather intelligence on our product development. The level of calculation was staggering. For 6 months, this corporate executive had been making lattes and cleaning tables, all while systematically extracting information from me through friendly conversation and photographing any documents I carelessly left visible. She had gained my trust so completely that I freely discussed aspects of our business I wouldn't have shared even with casual acquaintances. After confirming all this, I met with our small team to develop a response. The damage was done. Our initial approach and several key features had been compromised, but rather than give up, we made a radical decision. We pivot completely, I told them. New approach, new target market, new everything. We'll use this as an opportunity to build something even better. Over the next 4 weeks, we worked around the clock to transform Inventrack into something Capital Tech couldn't anticipate. Instead of general small business inventory, we narrowed our focus to the restaurant supply chain, a segment Retail Edge had explicitly avoided. We rebuilt our algorithm to address industry-specific challenges and developed partnerships with restaurant associations that had no connection to our previous targets. We secured funding from a venture capital firm that specialized in food industry technology, with whom we shared the full story of corporate espionage. They were impressed by our resilience and saw the pivot as evidence of our adaptability as founders. 6 months later, we launched successfully. In our press release, we included a brief, factual account of how corporate espionage had forced our pivot. We didn't name Capital Tech directly, but industry insiders immediately connected the dots. The story spread through tech blogs and eventually reached mainstream business publications. The public response was overwhelmingly supportive of us as the underdog who refused to be crushed by unethical tactics. Retail Edge, meanwhile, faced significant backlash. Several of their partnerships fell through as companies became wary of their business practices. Emma Chen quietly left to pursue other opportunities, according to their terse press release. 3 years later, Inventrack is thriving. We've expanded beyond restaurants to specialty food producers and distributors. Retail Edge still exists, but never gained the market traction they expected. As for me, I still enjoy coffee shops, but I work from a different one each day, keep my notes in encrypted apps, and never leave anything on the table when I step away. The most valuable lesson wasn't about protecting intellectual property, though that's certainly important. It was about how innovation and adaptability often matter more than your original idea. Our forced pivot led us to a better business model than we'd originally envisioned. Sometimes your competitors' efforts to destroy you can inadvertently push you toward your true path, if you're resilient enough to find it. The level of commitment to corporate espionage here is both terrifying and weirdly impressive. Imagine going through barista training and spending 6 months making lattes just to steal someone's startup ideas. That's not just crossing an ethical line, that's building a vacation home on the wrong side and settling in for the long haul. When your competitor's willing to master latte art just to sabotage you, you know you're onto something good. Sweet dreams, everyone. And remember, sometimes the people closest to you have the most elaborate plans for your downfall. Sleep well knowing you're not in any of these nightmares. At least not yet. I'll be back with more shocking Reddit stories next week.